Let's start creating the blockchain. We'll begin by building the most fundamental unit of the blockchain, the block. After all, to make a chain of blocks, well, we need the individual blocks themselves. At the core, blocks consist of 4 pieces of data. First, we give blocks a timestamp to record when they were created. The timestamp will be created with the JavaScript date object, which allows us to specify unique times down to the millisecond. Next, we give the block an attribute called lastHash, which is the hash of the block that came before it. Recalling information from the blockchain overview at the beginning of this course, the hash is a unique value for a block that is generated based on all of its unique data fields. So the lastHash refers to the hash of the block that came before. Third, we have the data that we want to store within the block itself, whether that's a string, an array of numbers, an array of anything, or an entire JavaScript object that represents transactions or any other kind of data. Fourth and finally, we have the hash itself for the new block, which is generated from all of its own data. In summary, every block consists of its timestamp, lastHash, data, and individual hash. With that in mind, let's create our first class in the project, a JavaScript class called block. So head to the command line, and then go ahead and open up your project in your preferred code editor. I like to use Visual Studio Code myself. So to start, I'm going to make a block.js file right at the root. Do the same. So we're going to have a block.js file right at the root of the project. And we'll start by declaring a class called block with the class keyword, and the name of the class is capital B block with a pair of curly braces as the body. Every class has a constructor method, so let's provide the constructor method with its pair of parentheses and its pair of curly braces for the body. With the constructor, the block class will receive values within individual instances of the block. For this block class, we'll have the constructor take in 4 arguments for unique values for the block. And those arguments are going to be the timestamp, the lastHash, the hash, and the data field, which is all those things that we just reviewed in that overview of what comprises a block. Within the constructor now, we'll then take these incoming values and set a property on the class for each value. To set a property on the instance of this class, we use the this keyword, and this is a special keyword that allows a class to refer to any individual instance of the class as that instance is being interacted with. Now, this concept is best understood in code, so this will make more sense once we've completed the constructor method and we've created an instance of this block class. But what we want to do is we want to set a field for every argument into this constructor according to the instance of this block. So for example, this .timestamp is going to be equal to the incoming timestamp. This .lastHash is going to be equal to the incoming lastHash. The hash, again, is going to be equal to the incoming hash. And finally, we have the data field itself. Nice. That completes the block class. Now for some instances. We create an instance using the new keyword. Let's create a new instance at the bottom of this file by using the new keyword, and we're going to say we want a new block instance from the block class. Let's also assign this instance to a variable. We're going to call this block1, and we're going to use a constant. Constants in JavaScript can't be reassigned after they've already been declared, so it's a handy way to create a variable to make sure that the variable is safe throughout the course of the program. And now we can pass in some relevant values for this block instance. Let's use some dummy values. So for the timestamp, how about 010101? This can be anything for now. We just want to see what an instance of this block will look like. Let's call this foo lastHash. Likewise, we'll have foo hash and also foo data. Nice. And finally, let's console.log the block1 in a string so we can identify what is being logged, and then as the second argument, the object itself. Nice. Let's head back to the command line now that we have this changes. Let's go ahead and run the file. So I'm going to run node and block.js, and what we get as the output is that block1 is an object of the block class type and it has all the relevant fields that we pass into the constructor. So this block1's block timestamp is what we pass in as the first argument, and following from the last hash to the data, it's whatever we pass in to the constructor. Very cool. Now, if you're wondering how I'm resizing my windows very quickly, I'm using an application called SizeUp. It is a paid developer tool, and I use it because I've already memorized the shortcuts, but there are free alternatives out there. And this is something that I mentioned previously when doing the JavaScript overview. All right, cool. So mission accomplished. We created a block with a timestamp, a last hash, a hash, and a data. Very nice. Now that completes the basic building block, literally, of the blockchain. Before we move on though, let's make a slight improvement to how this block class is currently structured. As a best practice in coding, I prefer to wrap functions in a map-like key-value structure when there are a high number of arguments. I consider 3 or more arguments pretty high. So notice that for the constructor of the block, we currently have 4 arguments. So let's wrap this whole thing within a pair of curly braces. So all the arguments within the constructor are now within a pair of curly braces. The advantage of wrapping the arguments in an object like this is that you don't have to remember the order of the arguments when you create instances later on. Order might seem like a very small thing to care about, but it's actually one of the most hard to pinpoint issues when it becomes one in large software projects. Small improvements like using a map for a function argument makes a huge difference in making sure things are consistent when you're calling code. So this is going to require us to update the block1 instance arguments. So overall, let's wrap this whole part within an object, and we need to specify each value according to their object key. So the first one is a timestamp. The second one is the last hash. The third one is the hash. And the final one is the data. Nice. And to prove the point of not caring about order, let's accidentally put the timestamp last. Or let's say we just wanted the timestamp last. We can even make the data the first part as well. So if we have data first, it shouldn't matter because when we still run the file over again, we see that the timestamp is still 010101, the last hash is still the last hash, the hash is still properly the hash, and the data is still the data. Awesome. The result is just the same. Great work. With our block class created now, let's move on.